Subscribe before the truth disappears. The morning the yard fell silent began like any other inside Black Ridge Penitentiary. Gray light crawling over concrete, metal doors humming awake, and men stepping into a world carved into factions. But at 6:42 a.m., long before the first head count sealed the day, something ruptured the stillness in a way no one would forget. It started with motion, blurred, frantic, purposeful. A man sprinting between the bleachers and the pull-up bars, the echo of his footsteps bouncing across the open yard. His name was Mateo Ruiz, a low-rank runner with ties to the Mexican Mafia. His breath shattered in short bursts, his hands trembled, and across the yard, 3 men were closing in behind him, moving with a calmness that didn't match the urgency in his eyes. The prison cameras caught everything in cold, unblinking detail. The way Mateo glanced back, the way fear twisted his expression, the way the early fog hugged the fence line like a curtain drawn too low. He wasn't running randomly. He was running towards something, someone just beyond frame. At the far end of the yard, standing by the weight racks, was another inmate, Raymond Cole, a tall, pale figure with distinct tattoos that spiraled from collarbone to wrist, marks of the Aryan Brotherhood. He wasn't moving, he was waiting, almost still enough to be mistaken for a statue left behind decades earlier. Mateo's sprint faltered when he saw him. A hesitation, a misstep, a moment of realization that he'd been funneled, not chased. From the watchtower, guards hadn't yet understood what was unfolding. Fights broke out often. Territory shifted daily. But this was different. The air carried a tension weightier than anger, more controlled, more choreographed. Raymond stepped forward, a single step, enough to signal that the path in front of Mateo was closed. Behind Mateo, the 3 silhouettes tightened their formation. They weren't Aryan Brotherhood. They weren't Mexican Mafia. They were Black Guerrilla Family, moving in a straight line, calm, coordinated, like they'd rehearsed this moment. To outsiders, these 3 gangs were enemies by nature, ideology, and blood. But inside these walls, alliances bent, cracked, and reformed based on necessity, profit, or survival. Something bigger than old hatred was at play. Mateo raised both hands, not in surrender, but in confusion. His voice carried faintly across the yard, a single line, a plea. "I didn't say anything, I swear." The men closing in showed no reaction. Up on the catwalk, a guard finally shouted, but the wind tore the words apart before they reached the ground. Mateo spun around, searching for an opening, a blind corner, a gap, a miracle. But there was nothing, only concrete, barbed fences, and the forming triangle around him. Then, without warning, one of the BGF men stepped aside, not forward, not back, just slightly sideways. A gap, intentional. Mateo didn't question it, he bolted through the opening. For a moment, it looked like escape. For a moment, hope stretched thin across the yard. But then another inmate appeared from behind the outdoor storage shed, a man no one had noticed before. Lean, expressionless, wearing state-issued greens like everyone else, but his posture gave him away. Hands behind his back, shoulders eased, eyes locked forward. He stepped directly into Mateo's path. Mateo tried to stop, his shoes scraped hard against the concrete. Too late. The man whispered something too soft for the microphones to catch, and Mateo froze, breath trapped in his chest. Then, Mateo collapsed. No one touched him, no one swung, no weapon glinted in the sun. He just fell. Face first, arms limp, body unmoving. Guards erupted into motion, shouting, rushing, signaling lockdown. But on the ground, no inmate ran, no one fought, no one even flinched. They watched, still, calm, as if they were all witnessing a decision already agreed upon. By the time guards reached Mateo, His pulse was faint. His lips moved quietly like he was trying to form a final message, but no sound came. His eyes were wide, not with pain, but with recognition, as if the last person he saw was the last person he expected. A stretcher arrived. Medics knelt. Mateo's fingers twitched once. His chest rose with a shallow breath. Then nothing. But the strangest part wasn't the collapse. It wasn't the uninjured men who surrounded him. It wasn't even the eerie silence that followed. It was the symbol the guards found tucked into his fist. A scrap of paper, folded tight, as if someone else had placed it there. On it, drawn in rough pencil strokes, was a simple shape. 3 intersecting circles. A symbol known inside only by those who understood the deeper currents of power, beyond race, beyond territory, beyond centuries of old feuds. A symbol whispered about in rumors. A symbol tied to meetings no one admitted existed. Guards exchanged looks, but said nothing. Inmates turned their eyes away. And the 3 gangs, standing at different corners of the yard, all remained completely still, because they all knew what that symbol meant. Someone had broken the rules. Someone had spoken out of turn. Someone had revealed something that was never meant to reach the wrong ears. And Mateo Ruiz, small, insignificant Mateo, had paid the price for it. But the real chaos hadn't started yet. That would come 30 minutes later when guards searched the outdoor storage shed beside where Mateo fell and discovered a hidden compartment carved behind the wall. A compartment no inmate should have been able to build. Inside it, they found something that stopped the entire prison on its tracks. Something none of the 3 gangs would ever publicly claim. Something each would quietly suspect the others of planting. Something worth killing for. A small, sealed envelope, unmarked, untouched, waiting. And when the warden opened it, the yard alarms erupted again, this time for a very different reason. Because the envelope contained only one line, handwritten in all caps, "The meeting happens tonight." And suddenly, every cell block in Black Ridge Penitentiary understood something terrifying. Someone had called a truce. Someone had organized a gathering of the 3 deadliest prison gangs in the country, and no one knew who or why.
By evening lockdown, Black Ridge Penitentiary felt like a sealed pressure cooker. Doors closed with heavier echoes. Conversations dropped to whispers. Even the fluorescent lights humming in the corridors seemed louder, more intrusive, as if the building itself were listening. Word of the envelope spread the way everything spread inside, not through phones, not through paper trails, but through routines. The way men lined up for dinner, who sat where in the chow hall, who lingered a second too long in front of a gate. Each slight delay, each nod, each redirected glance carried a message. The meeting happens tonight. Not everyone knew what it meant, but the ones who mattered did. The Mexican Mafia's influence moved from the shadows of C Block, where their shot callers controlled the flow of contraband, to the open hallway where lineups formed for medication. They never announced decisions. They adjusted habits. A man who normally took the first shower took the last. A card game that always happened by the rear table didn't happen at all. The silence created its own shape. In A Block, the Aryan Brotherhood occupied the upper tiers, overlooking the day room from a height that gave them constant visibility. They watched who crossed whose path, who broke their usual patterns. They didn't ask questions. Questions suggested fear. They trusted signals. A folded towel on the wrong bunk rail, a tattooed hand resting too long on the railings, an extra tray left untouched in the kitchen. In D Block, the Black Guerrilla Family used the library, the chapel, and the education wing more than any other group. They moved in clusters built on history and shared ideology. Tonight, they kept their circles tighter. They focused on one thing above all: who was missing. Because when men disappeared suddenly inside, there were only three possibilities: segregation, infirmary, or something no one wanted to name. As the sun fell behind the chain-link fences and razor wire, Black Ridge shifted into its nocturnal rhythm. The yard emptied, towers lit up, and deep inside the complex, doors sealed shut in a layered sequence, block by block, cell by cell. But everyone waiting for the meeting understood it would not happen in a yard or day room. It would happen somewhere cameras couldn't see clearly, somewhere the walls did not echo as loudly, somewhere the three circles could intersect. That place was the old laundry tunnel. Decades earlier, the prison had run a full-scale laundry operation in-house, shuttling carts through a long, low corridor that connected the main blocks to a service wing. Years of upgrades and outsourcing had left the tunnel largely unused, half-lit and half-forgotten. It still technically existed on the facility map, but the doors that mattered were never listed in official schematics. The meeting was set for after final count. Count was a ritual. Guards moved past bars, calling out names, matching faces with numbers. On every tier, inmates pressed back, hands visible, expressions blank. It wasn't just about confirming who was present, it was about confirming who was missing. On one tier, a Mexican Mafia lieutenant named Luis Toro Valdez leaned casually on his bunk rail, hands behind his back, voice steady. He'd been inside longer than some of the younger guards had been alive. His eyes tracked the count officer the way a man watches weather rolling over distant hills, measured, patient, fatalistic. Across the tier, an Aryan Brotherhood member known as Griffin, with faded ink curling around his neck, listened for something different. The tone of the guard's voice when he called certain names. Any hesitation at all meant movement somewhere else in the building. In D Block's corner cell, Malik Harris sat on the lower bunk, elbows on knees, staring at the concrete floor. At his feet, a folded scrap of toilet paper lay beneath his boot. 3 intersecting circles, drawn in pen, barely visible. He didn't move when his name was called. He didn't have to. The guard already knew where to find him. Malik always stayed in place for count. The performance played out with clockwork precision. 10 minutes later, the overhead speakers crackled and a flat voice drifted through the blocks. Count clear. Stand by for lights out. For most men, this was the point where the night began. Cards in the low glow of contraband lamps, whispered arguments, restless sleep. But for a few, it signaled something else. Movement. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sequence of small, nearly invisible shifts. In C Block, a cell door that should have stayed shut slid open under the guise of a routine escort for laundry detail, a designation no one had heard all month. 2 guards walked past the row, one carrying a clipboard, the other holding a ring of keys. Between them, Luis Valdez stepped out, his expression neutral, his hands cuffed in front. In A Block, Griffin was requested for a last-minute property check. No one questioned it out loud. Property checks happened. Forms got misfiled. Numbers got crossed. But every experienced inmate knew property checks didn't usually require 2 officers, 3 sets of signatures, and a supervisor's quiet nod. In D Block, Malik was told he had a chapel issue to clear up. Something about scheduling, something about volunteers, something vague enough to be plausible, specific enough to end the conversation quickly. On paper, the prison was following its own rules. Escorts logged, doors unlocked and relocked, routes chosen through quiet corridors, cameras catching movements that meant nothing to anyone who didn't understand the code behind them. But if you slowed the footage down, if you aligned the timestamps, another pattern emerged. 3 men from 3 different gangs all left their blocks within the same 10-minute window. All headed towards the same wing. All disappeared from the main cameras at the same blind spot. The entrance to the laundry tunnel. Inside the tunnel, the air hung heavy with the smell of dust and old detergent. Pipes ran along the ceiling, sweating condensation. The lights were dim, spaced far apart, leaving long stretches of shadow between each metal cage fixture. Luis arrived first, escorted by a guard who unlocked the tunnel door, stood aside, and stepped back without a word. Luis showed no surprise. He had been in places like this before: empty storage wings, old boiler rooms, blind corners predating new camera installations. He knew what they were used for: deals, beatings, messages that couldn't be seen or heard anywhere else. Griffin came next, jaw tight, gaze sweeping the length of the tunnel in a quick assessment. He withdrew half a step when he saw Luis, instinct pushing him backward before discipline pulled him still again. Malik entered last, flanked by two officers who closed the door behind him and remained outside. Three men from three organizations that had bled each other in yards, showers, and chow halls for years, standing together in a narrow, aging passage few others even remembered existed. No cheers, no greetings, no handshakes. Just silence. For a moment all they heard was the drip of water from overhead and the low hum of the building's aging infrastructure. Then another figure stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the tunnel. He wasn't tall, not heavily built, and not visibly aligned with any group. No visible gang ink, no dominant colors, just the standard green uniform worn slightly neater than most. His hair was closely cropped. His expression was flat, almost bored. He was known inside by a nickname that didn't belong to any one gang: the Broker. He wasn't a shot caller in the traditional sense. He didn't control a block. He didn't command soldiers. But he handled something more valuable than muscle. He handled information. Contraband routes, guard debts, family ties, the quiet, invisible threads that linked outside streets with inside walls. If drugs, phones, or orders crossed multiple territories, chances are the Broker had helped them move or chosen to let them stall. He looked at the three men and gave a short, almost amused nod. You all got the message. Good. Means we're not as sloppy as they think. Behind him, on the cracked tunnel wall, someone had drawn the three intersecting circles again, this time larger, darker, etched over peeling paint. One circle for each gang, the overlap in the center for something else. What's this about? Griffin asked, his voice low, more suspicious than hostile. Luis didn't speak. Malik didn't either. Both watched the Broker instead, reading his posture, his breathing, the way he kept his hands visible at his sides. This, the Broker said calmly, is about survival. He stepped closer, into the thin strip of light between two dim bulbs. Out there, he tilted his head toward the invisible world beyond the walls. They think they understand how this place works. They think La M fights the whites fight BGF, BGF pushes back, and the cycle runs until we all take each other out. They like that story. It's easy, neat, predictable. He paused. But that's not what's happening anymore.
For a second, the tunnel felt tighter. The weight of his words pressed down like the low ceiling itself. Luis's jaw flexed. Malik's fingers curled loosely at his sides. The Broker looked from one to the other. Someone's cutting across all three lines, he said. Using your soldiers, using your colors, using your reputations. They're turning your people into disposable pieces in a game that doesn't end when the gates close. He let that settle before adding almost casually, Mateo Ruiz was one of theirs. He just didn't know it. 3 reactions, small, controlled, but telling. A narrowed eye, a twitch in the cheek, a tight exhale. Mateo had been a runner, a go-between, low-ranking, replaceable. That was what made him useful to everyone and no one. Someone gave Mateo information, the Broker said. Information about shipments, about routes, about money that doesn't match the numbers coming back to any of your people. When he started asking the wrong questions, they pushed him toward you, your crews, knowing how you'd react if you smelled betrayal. He nodded toward where the yard would be, several concrete layers above. And you did exactly what they expected. He stepped back, letting the shadows swallow half his face. The meeting tonight, he said quietly, isn't to stop a war between you. It's to stop something worse. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then a distant noise cut through the tunnel. The faint rumble of a steel door slamming, followed by the muffled echo of raised voices somewhere on the main floor. Griffin looked toward the sound. Malik glanced up, as if he could see through the ceiling. The broker didn't move. "He knows you're here," he said finally. "All of you. They're waiting to see whether tonight strengthens you or finishes you." He reached into the pocket of his greens and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it between two fingers, just at the edge of the light. "This," he said, "is the list of names that gets erased if we don't fix this now." He unfolded it once. All three men leaned in, just enough to read. None of them expected the first name on that list. It wasn't a rival. It wasn't a snitch. It wasn't even an inmate. It was someone from the outside. A name all three gangs had reasons, in different ways, to protect. Someone's death would ignite something none of them could control. The sound from above grew louder, a distant alarm chirping once, pausing, then chirping again. Not a full-blown emergency, not yet. Just a warning. The broker folded the paper back up. "We don't have time," he said quietly. "They've already moved the first piece." He looked at each of them in turn. "And by morning, one of your people won't be breathing." The alarm's distant chirp faded as the tunnel swallowed the sound, but the tension it left behind hung heavy, as if the air itself thickened. Luis, Griffin, and Malik stood shoulder to shoulder in a silence shaped not by alliance, but by necessity. Whatever name sat on the broker's list wasn't just a threat, it was leverage. And in a world built on control, leverage was a weapon more dangerous than any blade. The broker slipped a folded paper back into his pocket and stepped deeper into the shadows, his voice dropping lower, smoother, almost clinical. "They're counting on you reacting the way you always have, fighting each other, blaming each other, bleeding each other dry." He tilted his head slightly, listening to the faint rumble above. "Because while you're busy doing that, they move." Griffin's jaw tightened. "Move how?" The broker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for them to follow. The tunnel stretched ahead like a vein carved through the prison's skeleton, narrow, dim, lined with pipes that shuddered whenever hot water surged through the building. Each footstep echoed, distorted by the low ceiling and the years of dust layered on the concrete floor. After a dozen paces, the tunnel split. Left led toward an abandoned maintenance room sealed off decades earlier. Right led toward a metal grate bent slightly out of shape. Recent damage, not old. The broker stopped there. "This," he said, lowering his voice, "is where the first piece moved through." He crouched and ran his hand along the concrete under the grate. Luis and Malik stepped closer. Griffin stayed slightly back, eyes sweeping the tunnel behind them. What looked like dust at first was something else. Small, broken fragments of packaging tape, the kind used to wrap bundles meant to be hidden, smuggled, delivered. "There was a drop here 2 nights ago. Not one of yours, not one of theirs, something new." Luis frowned, his voice calm but sharp. "A shipment? Through here? Impossible." "Impossible for you," the broker corrected. "Not for the ones using you all as cover." He lifted a small object from the ground, a torn corner of a plastic bag. Faint print on the edge suggested it once held something valuable, the kind of contraband too profitable to leave unclaimed by any gang inside. But none of them recognized the branding. "The product isn't from your people," he said softly. "It isn't from the AB.
It isn't from BGF. It's coming from outside, routed in through channels none of your crews control. Griffin's expression darkened. Someone stepping on all 3 territories at the same time? That's the idea, the broker replied. Flood the system, get you all scrambling, make each of you think the others are responsible. Malik knelt beside him, voice low. Why plant it here? Why in our house? The broker exhaled slowly, almost thoughtfully. Because they don't want to run this place, they want to break it. A heavy silence followed. Breaking a prison wasn't just about violence, it was about destabilizing the fragile balance held together by invisible lines: respect, fear, routine, hierarchy. If those lines snapped, chaos wouldn't stay inside the walls, it would spill outward, affecting families, neighborhoods, entire networks of power. "And Mateo?" Luis asked quietly. The broker looked up. He found one of the drops, picked it up thinking it was one of his own crew's stashes. When he asked the wrong person where it came from, they steered him toward the AB, told the whites were moving product through his yard, told BGF the opposite. Simple lies, efficient lies. Malik cursed under his breath, something raw, frustrated, too quiet to echo. Griffin folded his arms. Someone wants a riot. No, the broker said. They want a collapse. Before anyone could speak, a loud metallic slam echoed from above, followed by a cascade of heavy boots pounding across a walkway. The building's infrastructure trembled. Malik and Luis instinctively shifted into defensive stances. Griffin's eyes narrowed, calculating. The broker didn't flinch. "That," he said, pointing upward, toward the ceiling where pipes snaked through rusted brackets. "Right above us is Infirmary Wing B. 15 minutes ago someone found a man unconscious in his bunk. Not stabbed, not beaten, something else." Luis tensed. "One of mine?" The broker shook his head slowly. "Not from La M, not AB, not BGF." Griffin's eyes narrowed. "A civilian? A contractor?" The broker stepped back into the center of the tunnel, his expression turning cold. "Close," he said. "A nurse, a woman who wasn't supposed to be on shift tonight, someone who had access to medications that could knock out an entire block without leaving a mark." For a moment, the entire tunnel felt too narrow, too still. The broker looked at each of them in turn. "She's alive," he said, "but barely. And she had this in her pocket." He reached into his shirt and pulled out another slip of folded paper, thinner, smaller than the first. He handed it to Malik, who opened it slowly. 3 circles. The same symbol. But this time a 4th mark was added. A single diagonal line cutting through all 3. A division, a fracture, a warning. "That symbol," the broker murmured, "wasn't drawn by any of your people." As Malik held the paper, a faint sound drifted through the tunnel. The distant, unmistakable buzz of radios all switching frequencies at the same time. It rippled through the building like a swarm shifting direction. Griffin turned sharply toward the sound. "That's the emergency override channel." The broker stepped forward again, voice steady. "They're clearing the infirmary, moving staff, moving inmates. And when that wing empties," he paused, letting the implication fill the space, "they'll move the first target." Luis's voice dropped. "The name on your list." All 3 men exchanged a glance that held no trust, but shared fear. The broker began walking back toward the tunnel entrance, speaking without looking back. "If you want to stop this, if you want to keep your people alive, then understand something." He stopped at the first bend, turning slightly so only half his face was visible in the dim light. "Tonight isn't about unity, it's about survival. These walls have seen riots, stabbings, fires, lockdowns, but they've never seen what's coming now." He nodded once, slowly and deliberately. "Because someone outside this prison controls people inside it. People with badges, people with keys, people with access. A long silence followed. Finally, Malik spoke, voice heavy. "What do we do?" The broker gave a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "You don't have a choice. You have to find the first target before they do." Griffin stepped forward. "Who is it? Just say it." The broker reached back into his pocket, pulled out the folded list again, and held it out. Luis took it this time. He unfolded the paper slowly, read the first line, and froze. Not a gang member, not a rival, not an inmate. A name from the outside, one tied to all three organizations in different ways. A bridge between networks, a negotiator, a stabilizing influence. Someone whose death could ignite feuds across multiple states. Luis exhaled shakily. "It's my brother." The tunnel fell silent. Above them, the emergency buzz grew louder, closer, urgent. The broker nodded grimly. "And by sunrise," he said, "they'll plan to make it look like one of you ordered it." No one moved. No one breathed. In that moment, the three deadliest prison gangs in America understood the truth. They weren't facing a rival. They weren't facing each other. They were facing an invisible hand, someone willing to burn all three empires to ash to build something new atop the ruins. The broker took one final step backwards into the shadows, voice echoing softly through the tunnel. "If you thought this place was dangerous before, wait till you see who's really running it." The lights flickered. Boots thundered overhead. A distant alarm erupted into a full, continuous wail. Someone had already moved on the first target. And now, the countdown had begun. If you thought this one was wild, wait for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.